To be the leader of the A-League is arguably the hardest job in Australian sport. John O'Neill was first, appointed as chief executive of the then FFA in the wake of the Crawford Report. He oversaw the creation of a new promise for Australian football, but had to tell the old clubs they didn't belong. Ben Buckley was next. He brought us grand old clubs like Gold Coast United and the North Queensland Fury. By the time that David Gallop came along, the tension between the clubs and FFA was palpable, leaving James Johnson to oversee the inevitable separation of Federation and League. Flying under their own flag, Danny Townsend sold the grand final, Nick Garcia disappeared as quickly as he came, and Stephen Conroy's always temporary stint saw the club's distributions crash. Now, that list admittedly only tells one side of the story. All those names come with successes and failures, but the track record shows this is not a job for the faint-hearted. So with the league and clubs struggling for bums in seats, cultural relevance and financial sustainability, what comes next? That is up to Steve Rosich, the new CEO of the A-Leagues. Jacob, another interesting little bit of news coming across our desks today. The A-Leagues has a new head honcho.
Yep, somebody new to point all the blame at, I guess. No, it's certainly interesting, and we've seen a lot of discourse about his appointment already, and what people think of it, and his experience and his CV in sports administration in the past. But look, let's just for now look at this as the next phase of this league and for football in this country. It's certainly going to be interesting to see how it pans out, and of course it's very difficult to make a judgment before he's even had his first day in charge. But no, it's certainly an interesting piece of news, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it also kind of came out of nowhere, right? I don't think there was too much talk about this even being announced at any point soon, and all of a sudden today, just during the middle of the day, it's just, oh, by the way, there's a new guy he's going to be coming in, he's going to take over. So no, it'll be certainly interesting to see how he pans out. I'm sure we'll have a discussion on what we all think about it, but yeah, there's already quite a lot of discourse about it.
Yeah, Poletti, hello to you. I think the first reports were maybe had 20-30 minutes on the official announcement out of the APL today.
Yeah, it was pretty much it. And I want to, bounce off the back of a point Jacob just made there that, the fact that it came with no notice, that there's something the APL have been quite good at doing in the last few years, is sort of not having any leaks out of the organisation for the most part. It's something that a lot of sports teams and leagues struggle with. Now, some of those quote-unquote leaks can be planted stories that are deliberately leaked to the media, but, sometimes you just have sources because a lot of different people know each other and the like. And I guess, as much as a lot of people aren't happy as such that the APL is such a tightly operated ship and, operates in a lot of secrecy, stuff like this doesn't get leaked to the media, for better or for worse, I think. So that's something that, depending on which way you want to look at it, that they could be applauded for. I'll tell you what, though. Well done, Lachie. Great intro. Yeah, it's back. The intro's back.
Thank you.
I will say, though, not enough Greek references for my liking.
Yeah, that's a fair enough complaint. I don't know, I felt particularly poetic this afternoon as I was kind of crafting this episode. Maybe they'll stay, maybe they won't, who knows. But the intro is back at least for today. So, Steve Rosich, who is he? He is a sports administrator in Australia for at least maybe 25 years or so. He was the former CEO of the Freo Dockers in the AFL and also the Victorian Racing Club. So I guess a lot of the talk, Jacob, has been that, yes, Australian sports administration experience, not football experience.
Yeah, it's kind of a case of, on one hand, he's not a football person. On the other hand, he's not a football person. And I think that there's benefits and there's detractions for both of those points. Like, we want people that care about football and love football in these kind of roles, sure, but you've also got to remember that a lot of the time you just look at administration for football across this country and it's filled with football people, but they've all got different views and they're all very, I don't want to say egotistical, but very headstrong, right? And they have their perceived view of what football can be and how it's going to reach that. And, we've spoken endlessly about the need for collaboration in our sport, and we just don't seem to see it all that often. It's a lot of individuals going, this is the way forwards, this is what we're going to do. So I think it might actually be a good thing that we've not got a football person in this role that isn't going to necessarily have those, preconceived biases. That's it could be a bit of a challenge, sure, to step into this environment where there are a lot of people clashing heads and things like that. But on the one hand, it does help, not having that already there with him coming in. But yeah, that's certainly been, I think, the leading point among a lot of. I suppose he's already got detractors, right? I've seen a few comments saying that, we're getting a, former AFL guy in, like, what's that going to do? And, he doesn't know football. That's not what we need. I think what you got to do is look at the history that he does have, right? And, Fremantle, they've been through some tough times. I think it's fair to say. But in terms of a commercial output, at least during his time with Fremantle, it was pretty successful. Obviously, with the Victorian Racing Club, he's been pretty successful there as well, especially having to compete with the likes of New South Wales. So he's got that kind of, I suppose, history of being able to compete and being successful in these very difficult sporting environments. Obviously, the AFL, I think, easily the biggest sporting league in this country, right? Perhaps some of those people in New South Wales and Queensland will disagree with that, but it's absolutely massive. There's a lot of competition, especially at that kind of club level. And then in terms of racing, it is that big Victoria versus New South Wales thing. So I think that's the kind of experience he's going to be bringing to it, and it's really as well that commercial side as well, where he's had a lot of success in terms of sponsorship and things like that. And I think that's going to be a big thing for football in this country. Being able to kind of bring those commercial connections, because yes, he's not in the same role that he was in 5 years ago or whatever, but connections that you form in this business, they're not dependent on the role. It's person to person, right? So he's going to be able to bring those connections along to this new gig here in football, and that could be huge to kind of bring back perhaps a little bit of relevancy at that level for football in this country. It's something we're always talking about. There's a lack of investment, sponsorship figures aren't massive, broadcast deals aren't huge, that sort of stuff. And we've seen some promising broadcast stats recently, which might help push things in the right direction. But this is going to help even more, right? Having somebody who already has those connections in the commercial world, has experience bringing them in and investing in sport, that could be massive for football. So while he hasn't actually done anything in this role yet, and I think you were saying he starts in January, right?
Yep.
There's at least kind of that groundwork there from his experience and his kind of resume that suggests that it might be a good fit. Obviously, we have to wait and see, but I don't think it's as doom and gloom as some people are kind of pointing it out to be. And for me to be saying that, of all people, I think is I think that's a crazy thing.
So on the reaction, Poletti, I have a fair amount of empathy for him today, because through that intro I listed all the previous essentially chief executives of the A-League. Of course, we have that Football Australia period, whatever, and it feels like you can go through the list and you can all core football fans in Australia, at least of the A-Leagues, could point at every one of those people and say, this is the thing you screwed up. And because of that sentiment, true or not, and some have been better than others, it feels like it literally doesn't matter who steps into this role. There is always going to be a certain level of negativity because people have been burnt before, and viciously so in some respects. So I think whoever comes under the gun is starting behind par, and they have to earn some credit in the bank. So I have a level of empathy there. But as Jacob says, he starts on January 5th, so he gets to enjoy his Christmas. And then he's stuck into it, and he's got a big 6 months ahead, obviously with negotiations for the new TV deal and the Players Union CBA as well. They are two critical deals that must be done well to set the platform for the next 2 to 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like, as you said, to use the term you use, under the gun, it feels like he's very much, under the gun with 5 big blinds, and, they're about to go up on the next hand and he's in the big blind. So, the pressure's on, and he doesn't have a lot of room to work with it's almost a now or never for him. It's straight into the role because the pressure's on from day one. And that's unfortunate. I think one of the criticisms I had when we were discussing this morning in our little WhatsApp group was, again, that he's not a football person, and I want to see a football person in the role. And, Jacob, made some good points as well, but I don't necessarily mean football person in the way that others have been football people. And I'll bring up a tweet that Simon Hill posted probably about 20 minutes before we started recording. In the same week as more media jobs were shed at APL with good football people lost to the game, another non-football appointment is announced. Anyway, wish him all the best, but 3 basic requests. Number 1, be visible. Number 2, understand that football has its own culture. And number 3, have a plan. And to be honest, that's all I want. I don't care necessarily if he's a football person or not, but he needs to understand the game. Because, and I don't mean that in a, appealing to, the sickos like us, the ultras, the ones who are there every week. We're rusted on, we're tuning in. We can't wait for the next episode of, Total A-Leagues or Dub Zone or the weekly kickoff or whatever, ancillary content we're consuming. If you're listening to us, you're one of the sickos. We love you for it. Like he doesn't need to appeal to us. He needs to appeal to the football fan in this country that hasn't given the A-Leagues a chance in a decade. He needs to appeal to the football fan in the country who only plays the game, right? Like those are the sorts of people he needs to appeal to. And to do that, in my opinion, you need to understand the game, understand the nuances that come with that. It's not like AFL. It's not like NRL. It's its own entity. It's, bringing together the people who haven't cared about the A-League for 30 years for 20 years, right? Its entire existence, because their NSL team was kicked out. How do you get those people on board? Can you get those people on board? And understanding that dynamic between, to use a Danny Townsendism, old football and old soccer, new football, or whichever one it was. You guys know what I mean.
Yeah, you had it right.
I had it right. Good. One of the two I had was right. That's all that matters. And being able to, work like that, and that's not an easy job. What I will say is, I was talking to one of our listeners earlier today as well about it. And he actually made the point that maybe he has more A-League experience than we need to give him credit for, because the person I was speaking to said that the Wellington Phoenix are the Fremantle Dockers of the A-League. So he already knows how to deal with one of the teams.
What? What?
I don't even understand what the link is there. Anyway, I share a lot of people's I'd say concern, maybe the fact that he's not a football person. Yeah. And there is disconnect there, and we've seen what's happened in the past. When fan culture is not respected, when football traditions are not respected. So the part of me, the optimistic part of me, really hopes that even if he particularly doesn't fundamentally understand those values, the other people around, say the board of the APL, have understood their lessons.
Well, I mean, Stephen Conroy is still the chairman, correct?
Correct.
And so far, he's been a pretty decent steward for the game, right? I think he's represented the sport pretty well so far. So at least from that governance level of the board, they are still on that direction of understanding the sport. This is that executive appointment as CEO, where you want somebody with good business sense that's able to actually provide tangible results for the sport. And I think that's as well, as long as the board can, like you said, Lachie, kind of stay on track and keep the sport's best interests in mind, they're going to be able to kind of herd him back in if he starts to do anything too crazy. So
and I think on Stephen Conroy, right, like you said you think he's represented the game well. I would change that sentence slightly to say that he's made good decisions for the game since he's been in there. But as the chief executive, Rosich should be the face. Like Danny Townsend was the face of that grand final decision, right? For better or for worse, he was the face of the organisation at that time. And that is what Rosich's role is going to be. So I actually spoke to someone who is a former employee of Rosich, and they said that two things that he will do well is that he will be a salesman for the league. He'll present it in a good light, which was a very key point to what Alan Stajic was talking about a couple of weeks ago in that famous press conference now, having someone to really be an advocate for the game. And they'll be across, Rosich will be across, things like TV deals and sponsorships and bringing in money, which arguably really are the two biggest priorities for the A-League at the moment. And, being that face is so important because, we've said it numerous times before. And I think to a certain extent, Jacob, the fact that this appointment is now here means it was coming for the last month or two, which to some extent you now understand why someone like a Stephen Conroy has been so quiet on some of these issues, because if a new CEO is coming in, let them deal with it. You could just come out and say, we're going to appoint a new CEO, which I think would have been the best version of those events.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless, you understand it a little bit. So now it's Rosich's job to essentially be in front of the camera, come up with a plan for the league, like Poletti said Simon Hill is asking for, but also then sell that to the people. And as much as the APL is a private organisation, we've said this before, football is the public good. So you have to get football people on board. You have to have everyone buy into a vision, and that's when you start pushing in the right direction.
And I think that's where we've kind of seen things fall apart previously, where it feels like decisions have been made and then explained, if that makes sense, rather than explained and then made. Obviously the big one being that grand final decision, which, at the time and still to this day, I think is up there as one of the worst moves in the governance of the sport in this country. But it was a case of, we're going to make this decision because it makes sense to us. People are asking about it. Okay, I guess we've got to explain ourselves now. It should always be the other way around. You should be explaining those decisions and educating people on them, and like you said, putting in place a plan and kind of, showing people this is, the pathway that we've got and that we've set forwards, and then actually executing on that. And that way as well, it kind of gives you the chance to troubleshoot things. If you think there might be something in there that's a little bit, well, you don't know if people are going to buy into it or not. It gives you that opportunity to kind of test the waters, but also gives you time to build support for something. If you think it is really worth it, if you go out early with it and say, hey, this is, something that could be coming up down the line, and maybe people aren't sure of it at first, but you can continue to sell it and sell it and sell it, you can get that support. And then when you launch it, it isn't a drastic failure and everyone hates you. So yeah, I think it is kind of almost, that's where a lot of the failures in the past have been, in that it's been, these short-term decisions have been made and then had to try and be justified and explained afterwards to the footballing public. Whereas it kind of feels like, and we've said it a bunch of times, a lot of the time the stakeholders are ignored in those processes, and are kind of the last to know almost, and then all of a sudden the decisions upon them and it's made and there's nothing much they can do about it. So hopefully this can maybe represent a shift in the way that those kind of things are done. And like you said, Lachie, if anything, he's a good salesman, so it seems like that's kind of something that he will be hopefully good at doing, or will look to do a lot of, is put the league forward first, and talk about things, build up excitement for it early on, rather than kind of leaving it to having to justify the actions that have already been made, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think it is interesting that no announcement that, hey, got a new CEO coming in has been made, when that's kind of exactly what I've just been talking about. But with the way that things have gone, like you said, it kind of also just makes sense to just let it happen, and just go with it. But also to the point that Poletti made earlier about, let's make sure that he's going to have this in place, this in place, this in place. I would hope that the APL were diligent enough to have made sure those kind of things, like what is your plan and strategy going to be, that they have thoroughly discussed that with him in advance before appointing him. But yeah, no, it'll be definitely interesting to see how it plays out and what he does for it. I'm hoping for the best, because I think, like everybody here, I want football to be as good in this country as it can be, and we've all seen the promise and the potential for it. So yeah, I think it is about flipping the way things have been done in the past, and making sure that we're building support for things before we launch them, rather than the other way around.
I want to jump on that, Jacob. To the first point you mentioned about decisions being justified after the fact, and I think that goes back to what I said earlier, which is that the APL, for better or worse, has been shrouded in secrecy this entire time.
Yeah.
Other sporting leagues in this country would have leaked that idea, specifically to certain sections of the media to gauge the public feedback, and that wasn't done with the grand final deal. It was just we all woke up on that December morning, Monday morning. I had to drive back to Sydney because I was in Melbourne. Don't ask me why, because I don't remember. But I was driving back to Sydney, and I see it come across my timeline. It's just like, oh, that came out of absolutely nowhere. That was not probably supposed to happen. Sure, okay, let's see how this evolved throughout the day, and it just got worse and worse and worse the closer back to Sydney I got in terms of the public sentiment to it. So I'd definitely like to see a little bit more of that. To the second point there you made in terms of, his plan, his strategy, and everything like that, and hoping he's got that in place. Now, this is something you and I will understand a lot. I reckon some of our listeners will understand it a lot. Lachie, maybe not so much. If we take the US sports approach, right, where you have the league's commissioners, so you got your why have I gone blank on all of them now? You got your Don Garber in MLS,
Roger Goodell.
You got Roger Goodell. You got Manfred. All of these, all of these different commissioners, right? And essentially, they're the public voice for the owners, right? They apply a similar role to what the CEO is, but they're the public voice for the owners, and they do what the owners want, right? They're the public whipping people. Is it too much of a stretch to say that the CEO role is not that different here in Australian sports, where maybe there's a little bit of autonomy, but it feels very much like they are the public whipping people for the owners to get angry at? Was anyone angry at the owners over the grand final deal? No, they were angry at Danny Townsend. Why? Because Danny Townsend is the CEO. He was the public face.
And I think that was misplaced, just to add that in.
Well, once it started to come out that clubs had agreed to it.
Exactly. But I'm saying is that Danny Townsend took the entire brunt of it. And yes, he got a pay packet that very much compensates him for that, or compensated him for that, I should say. That still doesn't change the fact that he was the whipping face for the APL at that time. And who's to say that the new CEO is not going to be any different to what Danny Townsend was, and he may or may not have the ability to do certain things, but at the end of the day, he's going to be doing what the owners want, and he's going to be the one taking the lashings for it.
So this is an important point of education as well. Like with the whole grand final deal, that was a unanimously accepted vote by the board of the APL. At least 5 of which people from the clubs nominated by the other clubs and voted in by the other clubs. They all said yes to that deal at the time. The same is happening here with Rosich and his appointment. This has been, Stephen Conroy is the chair of the board, but he's not the only person there. He's not solely making this appointment. This is a board of clubs. I have the list of names somewhere. There's a few. I think Casper Tafta, Pierce, Melbourne City,
Gina Mara
from Victory, Gina Mara from MacArthur as well, and there's a Silver Lake representative, there's a Football Australia representative, and there's a few others there as well. So this is a group of people who have said this is the right appointment to take us forward. So that's worth remembering as well. And I think, Poletti, the timing of this appointment also tells its own story. Ever since Stephen Conroy,
new year, new me.
No. Longer than that. Longer than just a year. Because ever since Stephen Conroy has come in as the independent chair, and then Nick Garcia left and Conroy steps in this kind of interim executive role as well, his whole kind of mantra has been right-sizing and laying a platform for growth. And this is something Simon brought up in his post, and I'm looking right now at a comment that we received off some of our stuff today about the appointment, saying, quote, right-sized is a funny way to say we've actually let a lot of people go, in reference to that second round of media layoffs that the APL has done in the last few weeks as they look to transition more media responsibilities externally. And look, we all have mates that are part of the APL media team, and being made redundant is not fun, I'm sure, and it's horrible that this has had to happen. But obviously the whole idea of the right sizing, and this is what Conroy and how he's describing it, the idea of right sizing implies that you overextended in the first place. So yeah, it's obviously horrible that these people have lost their jobs, but was it responsible to give them to them in the first place is the idea. And Conroy would say no, they've gone from a very significant loss to an operating profit in the last financial year just gone. And this appointment of CEO, and Conroy's quotes in the press release back this up, is that this is kind of the final part of that transformation period, Poletti. Hopefully all the, obviously we're looking at crowd numbers at the moment. We're not too happy with where they are. There probably is still a little bit more hurt to come, but the fundamental building blocks of growth, hopefully, that will come over the next 3 to 5 years have been laid. And this is the final one. So hopefully give him 6 months, give him a season, give him the World Cup to happen. But then after that does happen and the broadcast deal is signed, the CBA is signed, then really Rosich should be accountable for strong growth in the years afterwards.
I genuinely hope that's right, because as we've talked about, this is a very turbulent period. I'd just a couple of points that you made. I'd argue that maybe cutting members from the media department is not the greatest use of trying to save resources, and I'll use the crowd figures as an example. They're dropping and they're dropping fast, and I, as you said, I think there's still a lot of hurt to come. I think we're going to hit some new lows before the season is over, particularly when there's a lot more games that are outside of, the two major metropolitan centres in Sydney and Melbourne around, very similar to what we had last week. That, there is probably, I mean, let's look at Friday night, for example, right? You've got, you've got the two Sydney teams playing off Macarthur and Western Sydney Wanderers 2 hours apart from each other on the same night, and there's no other games in Sydney for the rest of the weekend. And there's only one game in Melbourne, which is the Derby. Now, conceivably, sure, the Derby should do 22-ish thousand, but those numbers have been on the decline as well. Victory still haven't sold out their entire away allocation as of the time of recording. So it's very much a situation where that number could even be hurting a lot more than what we would expect it to usually. And before you know it, we're looking at a sub 30,000 attended round again with a full six game slate. That's not a good look. I'd argue that keeping media visibility, particularly league sanctioned visibility, might have been a better use of money, because then you can promote things a lot better. You can have more. You don't have to rely on, something.
I don't think they're doing this to reduce their output. They're trying to make it more efficient.
Maybe,
right?
But I mean,
external.
if you've got less people to go around, that could mean more scheduled posts. And we know the difficulty of dealing with scheduled posts at times is you're putting content out when maybe something shouldn't be going out, or something should, because something else has come up and stuff like that. So you can end up with your wires crossed quite easily, and stuff gets lost in the shuffle. Look, I hope that the decisions the APL have made they've gotten it right, and that things will get better over the next 6 months, particularly across the A-League women, something I'm incredibly passionate about. They've almost, not quite a do-over, but they've been given a second life, essentially. Sorry, Jacob, but it's like if you get dropped on 5 and you go on to make 82. You've got that second chance there to make things right. And that's what this Asian Cup represents for the A-Leagues, is a chance to learn from the mistakes of the Women's World Cup and not capitalising on that as well as they should have, with the fact that there's a tournament here on home soil. There's still A-League games to come in the immediate aftermath of the tournament. There's games going on before the tournament is even finished. Can you convince, people who maybe don't go to the A-Leagues, to A-League women's, A-League men games every single week, but live in Australia, to come to an A-League game after they've attended an Asian Cup game? That's going to be the big thing here, is just capitalising on that opportunity. Australia should go deep, so maybe there's Matilda's fever again. Probably not to the same extent, because an Asian Cup doesn't have the prestige of a World Cup. But as long as the A-League has a strategy in place to capitalise on that, this is a sentence that could come back to bite me. This should be near impossible to screw up for Rosich. But
why would you say that?
I'm saying, look, everything is lining up perfectly for the APL to take advantage of this. You were
complaining about commentators' curse earlier today, Poletti,
I was,
and
yes.
now you've got them done that.
Look, I'm saying the point is that everything is lining up, and all you got to do is roll the pin down the alley and knock them down.
So it's undeniable.
It's not as easy as it sounds.
No, it's not. And there's always a scale to these things. What do you even define as succeeding and failing? It's a spectrum. But